or do we need to?
No, they'll do it for us. So.
Oh, perfect.
Cheers. All right, thank you very much. We'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for this Conservative Home event in partnership with Which. Thanks to those of you for joining us in the room and those following along online as well. My name's Angus Parsad-Wyatt from Conservative Home, and I'm delighted to be joined by our panel here today. So firstly, Ruth Edwards MP, thank you. We've got Monica Arino as well. Sorry, got you the wrong way around. Rusia Concha, from Which, and Monica Reno from Amazon as well. So we'll get started. There will be time for questions later on, so do get those creative juices flowing and come up with some great questions for our panel. But first off, Rusia, if you could, just sort of thinking about, obviously the UK is as the UK's leading voice, which obviously being kind of the champion of consumers. What are the specific harms that consumers are facing online at the moment? What are the real challenges for people? And how do government, businesses and consumers respond to it? And who is it that should be doing that?
Thank you, Angus, and great to be here and great to be in this panel with Ruth and Monica. Let me start by saying something that is probably quite obvious, but these digital markets basically are key for our daily life. I mean, we run our lives from here and from our computers. And that is why it are so important for us. And during the pandemic, we say how key they were for us for shopping, for working, for keeping us entertained, for being in contact with our families. So it's quite important that these markets work well for all of us, because they are key. They are key for us, for businesses, for the economy, and for our well-being. Unfortunately, these markets today are not working as good as they should be, because there are a number of harms. So let me go over some of them. The first one is safety. Is today you go to outside to the high street and you buy a product from a retailer. That retailer have the obligation to make sure that that product that you are buying there comply with the standards and the laws in this country. However, if you buy a product for a marketplace, that marketplace is not legally required to make sure that that product comply with the law. So we have done a number of investigations where we find in this marketplace a lot of unsafe products. So let me give you some examples. We have found Christmas lights that can give you an electric shock. We have found recently baby carriers that are unsafe. Recently, we also find weapons that you cannot sell in the UK, but you find in those marketplaces, like zombie knife, flick knife. So obviously, the current situation is not fit for purpose. Let me give you another example. Scams. 1 in 10 people in 2021 were a victim of a scam that came via social media or search engines. The impact is not only financial, but it's also emotional. At the moment, we don't have the legal requirements for these online platforms to stop that content, these criminals using the platform to reach out to all of us. Let me give you another example, fake reviews. As any misleading information that you receive, because of fake reviews, you maybe make a decision that buy a product or a service that actually is not good for you. And these fake reviews are quite effective in misleading you and leading you to buy things that are not fit for purpose, for example. So we have seen that you are twice as likely to buy a poor quality product that have been boosted by fake reviews. Let me move to another harm, which is competition. Several of these digital markets are dominated by a small group of companies. That is not only bad for consumers, it's a risk for consumers because constrained choice if there is not enough competition, but also can result in bad outcomes for businesses. Many businesses out there need these big tech companies to enable this business to get to you. And at the moment, those businesses maybe are subject to unfair, sorry about the music, unfair terms because there is not enough competition. They need this big tech to get to all of us. So it's quite clear that there are a lot of harms in these digital markets that need to be tackled. So what is that the government can do? Well, the good news is, by the way, that they have been a lot of thought in this country about how we can tackle this harm in a proportional way, in a way that will not constrain good innovation and actually will protect consumers to be when they are online. So we need the government to get on with the online safety bill. There is a part of the online safety bill tackling fraud, pay for advertising, that many criminals are using pay for advertising to scam you. Just to give you an example, we did a study and found that a criminal can make £800,000 with an ad per day. So obviously scammers are out there trying to make a lot of money because there is not enough control by these online platforms in the way that they are using their sites. We also need that the government get on with that, with that review of safety laws, which will include the role of the marketplaces. And we need that the government publish the digital markets and consumer and competition reform that was part of the manifesto and also was announced in the Queen's speech. So the good news is, for years, we have been looking at these harms. There have been a lot of consideration about what is the best regulation that we can introduce to protect you and me. And now we just need to get on with the job.
Thank you. And you're right. Obviously, one of the greatest dangers with online shopping is that anybody can go and buy a loudspeaker online and place it right behind the tent. So we'll press on, but apologies for the noise. And Monica, so Amazon's obviously a customer-centric business. It's all about customers. What does that mean, and what does that mean for your approach to tackling fraud and scams?
Thank you, Angus. And it's really great to be here and part of this panel and part of this really important discussion. Amazon cares enormously about safety and customer trust. And we work really, really hard to earn that trust and to maintain that trust. And we know that that trust can be lost really, really quickly. So a lot of the things, Rocío, that you have mentioned are really, really important and things that we're working on day in and day out. We have very strong policies in place, and we want to make sure that there's no counterfeit on our stores, that we're protecting customers from fraud, and that everyone can have a safe shopping experience. Now, we have hundreds and millions of products on our site, and we have a lot of sellers that sell through us as well, 85,000 sellers in the UK, selling and exporting here. And they can be victims of fraud. We sometimes are used, and our name is used, to defraud customers. And there is advertising fraud that occurs. Now, what's our approach to tackling that? As I said, safety and compliance is a really top priority for us. We spent over $900 million last year, and we have over 12,000 people working to protect and combat abuse. Our approach is a very holistic one, and there's no one single solution to tackle some of these issues. We start with prevention. And so we take a very proactive approach to ensure that everything that is listed on a store in the first place passes strict compliance requirements. We also put a lot of resource in detecting and scanning and monitoring what is sold to make sure that it's in compliance. And we use very sophisticated technology for that, as well as people. So it's not just all about technology, but that is really, really essential when we're talking very sophisticated criminals as well in this space. And then it's really important that the problems, when they appear, can be reported easily and quickly by customers, and that we can take action swiftly. And that awareness is raised. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen is very little awareness, particularly of the more sophisticated frauds that have been developing post-pandemic. So we're spending a lot of time and effort working with small businesses and others to raise that awareness. And finally, taking action and ensuring that there is proper redress when things do go wrong. That is really important, making sure that products are taken down quickly, that recalls are working, and we're working very closely with regulators in the UK and around the world to ensure that we identify trends as well and can take that action. And the actions that we take really vary, but they go from pausing or removing a listing to banning a seller from our sites altogether. Now, one of the things that I love to discuss with the panel and hear your views on and the audience's views on are around enforcement and also collaboration. One of the things that we have noticed is that, yes, there are a lot of laws, there's robust legislation in place, we follow all of those, but enforcement sometimes is lacking. I'll be very happy to talk about fake reviews, which is a topic very close to our heart and one that we care very, very much about. But also collaboration. The best examples that I've seen of things really working in practice is when we're working with consumers organizations like Which, with regulators, civil society, and other industry players, and across sectors. So we've seen similar challenges, not just in the e-commerce space, but also in the telecoms industry and in the banking industry. So there's a lot of cross-sector collaboration taking place now that I think it's really, really encouraging. I'll stop there. There's plenty that I'm sure we can discuss a bit more on, but I hope that gives you a very quick and general overview of how we see this problem and how we want to take it forward.
Thank you, Monica. And really, taking on that point around whose responsibility it is to kind of manage the online space and to keep people safe. From a political perspective, how does the Conservative Party, how does the government position themselves to show that we're on the side of consumers online? How do we show that we are doing what we can to keep people safe?
Thanks, Angus. Well, first of all, I think I'll just congratulate Conservative Home, because in various guises I've been working in and speaking on issues to do with cybersecurity and scams for the better part of 10 years, and I really thought I had seen it all, but I have never conducted a conversation on online scams to the soundtrack of Benny Hill. So well done, you've put a new one after a decade. So look, I think the first thing to do is to realise how difficult the situation is, right? It's very easy for the government to bash private companies, for private companies to say, oh, it's all government's fault, for us to talk about the low conviction rates of fraudsters. But it is a very difficult problem that we are all trying to tackle, because scams and scammers are very innovative. We saw this over the pandemic, which also got nicknamed the Scandemic, because we saw people have false government email addresses, web domains, offering advertisement for fake coronavirus grants, all the support grants the government had. Again, we saw the rise in remote working without the security to match, so that was a gift for scammers. And of course, people were lonely, stuck in their houses, so we saw a 40% increase in romance scams. Scammers will acclimatise and be very quick to take advantage of the changing situation. And we have that now with the energy support package that the government's putting out. Just yesterday, as we were all putting out graphics saying, this is when the obviously bills are going up, but this is what the government's support package is. We were also putting out loads of adverts saying, this is how the energy support package is going to be delivered. Nobody is going to ask you for your bank details. Please do not give them to anybody, because in the last couple of weeks, MPs have been bombarded with things from constituents saying, I've received this text message Do I need to give my details in order to get the energy payments? No, you don't. But obviously that's a bandwagon they've jumped on really quickly. I met with the FCA the other week, who are really worried about loan fee fraud. Obviously, as inflation is hitting household budgets, you've got more people applying for loans, and they're receiving a growing number of reports from consumers who've applied for a loan, been asked to pay a fee, anything from sort of 25 quid up to hundreds of pounds in order to secure this loan. They pay the fee, and of course, they never ever see the loan. So they're really quick to take advantage of changes in circumstances. So it is, and they're much more sophisticated than they used to be, particularly if you look at things like clone scams online, which has been a real issue that I've been fighting quite hard on, because I've had constituents in my surgeries who have been conned by clone scams and lost 30,000, 40,000 pounds. They're very convincing. They impersonate genuine members of staff at this company. They have LinkedIn pages, all sorts of things that, if you were just making sort of normal checks as a member of the public, you would be definitely forgiven for thinking that this was a genuine article. So in terms of whose responsibility it is and how we can protect consumers, so as a Conservative, I think this is everyone's responsibility. And if I use sort of the analogy of road safety, obviously it is reasonable to expect the government to set laws around safety standards for vehicles and around safe road use. You expect car manufacturers to design vehicles not just to the minimum laws around safety, but to the best ones possible. And then we expect people, individuals, to use their judgment and common sense when they're in their car and when they're driving. And if any of those three break down, then we have a problem. So I think that's what we need to sort of bear in mind as we think about the cybersecurity and the scams problem. So some of the things that are being done already, it's really important that we focus on prevention, because we're not going to prosecute our way out of this, partly because of the volume of the scams that are being carried out, partly because a lot of them are being done by organised crime, which are based overseas, where there are not extradition agreements with the UK, and I can't see in the current situation that Vladimir Putin is going to be particularly keen to extradite scammers based in Russia and territories where they have influence to the UK to face justice. So we have to focus on prevention. And for quite a few years now, the National Cyber Security Centre have focused on an active cyber defence programme, which they describe as aiming to protect the majority of people from the majority of scams the majority of the time. So to take out some of that bulk volume online scams. So what they're basically trying to do is make it more difficult for scammers to exploit quite common weaknesses, make UK companies, UK PLC, UK public institutions a more difficult target for scammers. So they take down malicious sites, they block access to known phishing sites, they have a cyber threat intelligence feed to industry, and they provide assessments of things like email security compliance and web security to organisations to help them fix really common issues. Rasia mentioned the online safety bill, requiring companies to do much more to keep their services safe for people. We had user-generated fraud like romance scams in the scope of the bill from the start, after a really well-fought campaign by which myself and a lot of colleagues supported. We now have these paid-for fraudulent ads in scope as well, which I think is really important. A lot of people who fall for these ads say, well, I thought the ad was genuine because it was on Google, so obviously Google have checked them out, right? And that is not an unreasonable thing to think, but they haven't checked them out. There is now Google and Amazon now have much better checks, certainly than Google did previously. I'm much less aware of what Amazon's been doing, so it's been really interesting to hear about it. But there is no law requiring them to do that. So at the moment, we are relying on the goodwill of companies. So whatever happens with the online safety bill, I hope that comes back to Parliament quickly and we can get this really important content through. And then the third one, I think, is making consumer products safe to use. So we had the Product Security and Telecommunications Bill go through Parliament recently. I'm sure you all followed that very, very closely, but I was on the Bill Committee for that. And it's done three simple things around product security. It's banned default passwords. There's a requirement for products to have a vulnerability disclosure policy, so any security weakness in the product is identified and notified, and a requirement for transparency about how long, what sort of time periods the manufacturer is going to provide security updates for your product. And this is increasingly important as obviously more and more of our devices are now connected to the internet, so there's a much bigger attack surface there for cyber criminals. But we do have more work to do. I think public awareness, we need to do a lot more to raise public awareness. I think it is a difficult thing for people who haven't been brought up, particularly with the internet, who haven't been brought up learning about keeping safe online at school. I'm still recovering from the day when my mum told me that she had written her bank PIN number down in her address book under the cunning and impossible to crack cipher of Mrs. Penny Pin. So I think we do have more work to do, and I think, you know, we do stuff, but when I think about the sort of massive campaigns we had around things like Don't Drink and Drive, or the massive drive we had to get messaging out about the vaccine and tackling misinformation around that, I think we don't do it at probably the scale we need to. I think we also need to look at consistency over compensation for victims. And I know that Which have done a lot of work on this, and I'm sure Rusia could talk more about that. But obviously your super complaint has done a lot of good there, and we have this this voluntary scheme, but it's not really delivering what consumers need. I believe complaints about people not being compensated for being victims of authorised push payment scams have doubled in the last year to the Financial Services Ombudsman, and 3/4 of these complaints are currently upheld. So that would suggest to me that there's a problem with the situation at the moment. And then finally, and this is one that I think we've needed to do for a long time, but I still haven't figured out how to do it, is to raise it up the list of political priorities, because you are far more likely to be a victim of a crime online than you are on the street. And yet I never have anybody write to me or come and see me in my surgery and say, why isn't there more resources going into police tackling online fraud, going into keeping us safe online? Everybody wants to see police officers out and about on the beat, on the street. And it's not something that there is political pressure over, which I find really interesting, and I don't really know why, but I think that is something that we're going to have to focus on as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruth. And I think just from all three of your sort of opening remarks there, I think the key thing that is really coming through is about trust. And it's from both the consumer perspective, from what business is doing, from how government builds trust, from what consumer organisations like Which are doing. And I think to get into one of the points I know Monica wanted to sort of get us all talking about, was just thinking about that sort of fake review piece and how people can trust what's there online. So I'd be interested to hear a bit more from both, or from all of you, but thinking about how can people, how do we build trust in the online space? How do we make it so that consumers can look at something and know that that is something that they can trust?
Well, can I start? The only way that we can convince consumers that they can trust what they find on the internet is that it's genuine. It's basically tackling fake reviews. So on the area of information, we do quite a lot in telling consumers the things that they need to look at when they are reading fake reviews, to try to help them to identify those fake reviews. But fake reviews, as well as scams, and as Ruth was saying, they are quite sophisticated people. I mean, not all of them are sophisticated, but they are sophisticated people. That actually is very difficult for a normal person to really identify which are fake. So at the moment, to be frankly honest, if you are a consumer, the best thing that you can do is not to believe the reviews that you read, because at the moment there is no control on what these reviews are fake. And I know that they have been, the Competition and Market Authority working with the online platform have been doing quite a lot to try to tackle fake reviews, but unfortunately it's not enough. We still need better solutions to tackle this. And I will say that as a part of that, the Competition Market Authorities need to have better powers to tackle fake reviews, to make sure that those that are trading fake reviews online. There are a lot of people trading in this platform fake reviews. You can buy fake reviews. They are actually, those platforms allowing this to happen have more kind of a legal responsibility.
Sure. Do you want to comment on this?
Yes, I mean, it's a super important topic, the topic of fake reviews. Really, really important because they undermine trust in online shopping, as you say, Rocío. So we're really worried about them. Reviews in general are good, though. I mean, consumers love them, right? They inform what you're buying, and we know that consumers like them, so they have to be genuine. And it's a relatively new phenomenon, this commissioning of fake reviews at criminal scale and at large scale. We are taking a lot of actions globally, suing the administrators of Facebook groups, for instance. We took action in July against the administrators of over 10,000 Facebook groups that were just constantly chunking those reviews. And also in May, we took action against brokers. So we as a company have taken people to court, basically. And this is helping, but it's not enough. And there's more that should be done. In fact, I mean, there is at the moment some proposals to make the commissioning of fake reviews illegal. And that is something that we as a company would support because, it is important. But I also want to stress that reviews are not a bad thing in and of themselves. They do help customers make the right choices online, and that is also really important. It was a great innovation when it was first introduced.
Ruth, is there anything you want to add on that point around trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of looking at the legality of commissioning fake reviews is a really good one. I hope it's one that, as the Online Harms Bill comes back, we can look at properly as the bill goes through Parliament, because I think it will be amended quite a bit along the way, simply because of the kind of legislation it is, right? It's a sort of world first, so that's inevitably going to happen. Because what we don't want to do is start, we've got a vibrant digital marketplace in the UK, and what we don't want to do is start undermining confidence in that.
Can I add something on that? I agree, and I just to make sure that I have not been misunderstood. I completely agree with the fact that reviews are good. I mean, it's good to know you have used a product, to know how you use it. But at the moment, it's difficult for a normal consumer really to assess whether that review that he or she is reading is actually a genuine review.
Sure. I think one of the other elements of this is obviously the crime angle. I know, Ruth, you touched on this in your opening comments around our perception of crime in a physical sense on the streets is very different to how we view it online. Now, obviously, if I'm mugged in the street, they might get, 10 pence out of my wallet or whatever I carry around. I don't carry cash deliberately. But obviously, if someone hacks my bank account, that's everything. So what can we be doing in this space? Is this something that the banks need to be helping with in terms of where that's obviously more of an issue in the banking space? Or is it that that's something that we need to be looking at in legislation? Or is it something that it's tying together all these elements maybe through the Home Office and through the kind of policing structure as well? And should the police be looking at having sort of more, beefing up the sort of fraud teams and scam teams that they have? Yeah,
so I think there's definitely a big role for banks there, particularly around APP or authorised push payment frauds. And we do see a lot of messaging from banks on that. I'm with Lloyds, and quite regularly when I pay for stuff online, I get a message saying, do you know who this is? Do you know what this account is? The problem is when you get it quite regularly, I think it becomes something that people just sort of click on, say, yeah, I've done that, and then off you go. So I do think there's an important role there for banks. I think there's an important role there for online platforms. As I said in my opening remarks, I don't think it's okay that platforms can decide whether or not they're going to make checks about who is taking out adverts on their service. You're making money from that service. I think I've got no objection to you making money from it, but not if you're not going to spend a bit of money just checking that the people who you're advertising for aren't actually going to be defrauding my constituents. I don't think that's unreasonable. But I do think we need to really push on the public awareness thing, because the problem is online scams will come at you from every direction. They pop up on your phone, they come into your email, they're there when you go on Facebook, they're there when you shop for things on Google, on Amazon, wherever you go, there is somebody trying to scam you. And I think most of the time, they manage to succeed because people are busy. It sounds silly, but the number of times I've received a text message, particularly potentially over COVID, when everybody was getting everything delivered, right? And we were sort of trying to answer more emails than it was possible to do in the space of a day. And you get a text message, and I say to my husband, oh my God, I've got a message from the Royal Mail and we've missed something, and is it important, and do I need to click on this? And he said, what the hell are you doing? This is obviously a scam. I said, oh yeah, good point. And that's after 10 years in the industry. But they succeed because people are busy and stressed and trying to do 5 things at once. So I do think we have to push on that education piece about just stop, think, do not be alarmed by, emails demanding money and saying they're about to cut off this service or that service or whatever, and really getting people to just sort of stop and use that judgment. That's not in any way a replacement for the work that companies and banks should be doing, and government, like I say, I don't think we've had strict enough legislation, and that's why I'm really pleased that we're having the online harms bill coming through. That's really important, but we do definitely need just to help raise that awareness, so wherever the new scam is coming from, people do sort of stop and have that pause just to think, because stuff does innovate so quickly that it takes a little bit of time for the prevention activity to catch up.
I 100% agree with that, Ruth. It's really, really important. And in fact, we and other companies have spent a lot of time in the last year or so working with Action Fraud and with Take 5 to make sure that those advertising campaigns are there and that consumers are aware. I think SMEs are particularly vulnerable, and we don't talk enough about SMEs, and they also are potential victims of fraud and scams. I think it's really important that we also support them, because again, you're talking about very, very small staff, and they don't have time to challenge that. So yeah, no, 100%.
Can I add something? I have a very good news for you, Ruth. You maybe already know, but we have a scam alert service. Yes. So all of you, if you want to sign to that, where we actually, as soon as we hear about a scam going on, we send out an alert to people so people know that this scam is happening. So education, absolutely, but as you say, complementing the other things that we need about the responsibilities of the different, of the businesses in relation to where these scams are being enabled to reach out to consumers. There is an area that actually I think that more can be done. Sometimes a scam appears in a particular platform, that actually communication in the ecosystem and say, this is happening, we identify this, be careful because the scammers will go to another place. So the sharing of information, and we have discussed this in the past, that share of data and information in real time to make sure that people can catch these criminals before they are using that platform to reach out to you. So I think that is an area more can be done.
I think one of those things is the scale of some of these scams. So you talked, Ruth, about some of the text messages and things. I got one of the ones this week about the energy rebate, and I think a lot of people got this text that comes through, and I think I see a lot of heads nodding in the room. Actually, just out of interest, straw poll, how many people in the last 2 weeks have had a fraudulent text around claiming money for energy, or, so one, yeah. Wow. So it could, at least probably about a third of the room. And I think one of the things with that, and it comes to this point around comms and the scale at which our messaging, our campaigning as organisations for everyone, and even for us as a media organisation, how we're communicating with the public and getting them aware of these things has to really match the level of the comms from the scammers. I mean, as we've just seen, they are able to send out thousands and thousands and thousands of messages to people. And I'd be interested to hear more on what we can be doing on that sort of comms point. And, it's obviously quite clear that the government needs to have a big, clear message, and there needs to be a priority there. But should it be the case, and which have obviously got their service, which is fantastic, but, with Amazon, for example, should you be carrying messaging on the site that sort of flags to people that some reviews might not be genuine, or that people should think first before acting, maybe? Is that something that you're looking at, or is that something that you've kind of considered at all?
We have messaging on our website to warn people around scams and frauds, and that's something that we have, and we make it very easy for people to report in various ways when they have been scammed or defrauded. Some people want to talk to somebody, but sometimes you don't want to talk to somebody because you feel quite embarrassed, actually, and it can be a mental health challenge to kind of talk about that as well. So it is important that you support consumers in kind of a holistic way, and that you keep them aware. But I think it's also, I mean, in addition to that awareness point, something we haven't discussed that we might want to spend a bit of time talking about is better data sharing between organizations. Because that's something we have been doing a lot of, and where more can be done. Because that's how you can get ahead of the criminals, right? They move very, very fast, and if they're good, effective, safe ways of sharing data and alert law enforcement, and then provide support for law enforcement to take the case and succeed in taking the case to court, I think you can see, again, much better enforcement and rapid action.
I fully agree with that. And my question to you is, what is stopping that sharing of data at the moment?
So some data sharing is happening, and we do that a lot, for instance, with counterfeits. And products that end up on our warehouses that are counterfeit. So that is something that is happening already. At the moment, the data bill has very general legitimate interest grounds for sharing data. In general, you want to be quite cautious when you're sharing data, so maybe the grounds are not specific enough. So there is something that could be looked at. What are those specific grounds with, under which you could share data? So there is something that can be done there. At the moment, we're looking and working with the IPO and with customs to see what more data we can share. So those are active conversations. It's a really difficult question and a difficult topic, but it's definitely one that we should all collectively explore a little bit more.
Sure. And I think turning slightly to the online harms bill, which was, as you said, a huge piece of legislation, a world first in terms of its scale and ambition of what it's trying to do. Ruth, do you think that there has maybe in the coverage of the bill to date been distractions from some elements, as in it's been the coverage of what's in the bill have been focused very much on specific things, which then overlook some of the really great stuff that is happening elsewhere? And a sort of follow-up with that is, what are the risks and or opportunities as that bill comes back to the House with the sort of the new administration and the new team, where there's obviously maybe a bit more of a focus on deregulation in some areas compared to previously? Is that likely to impact what's in the bill in a big way that might then change how people operate online?
Yeah, okay, so I think the debate about the online harms bill has been dominated by this legal but harmful content and the provisions around that. And colleagues have different views on that. Some colleagues feel it is very strongly that it's clamping down on free speech. I myself am a little bit more nuanced about it, because in my view we don't really have free speech online at the moment anyway, in that at the moment tech companies can basically decide what they're going to leave up, what they're going to take down, and they're not really accountable to anybody for how they make these decisions. And the provisions as drafted in the original online harms bill, though I believe this is going to change, is that what the government expects companies to do around this legal but harmful content is to basically set out what its position is, what it's going to allow on its platform and what it's not going to allow, and then make sure that they are enforcing that across the board. And if I can give you an example to bring it to life, Twitter banned Donald Trump's account because he had been tweeting stuff that was inciting violence on Capitol Hill. Now, I don't have a problem with that, but I think it's rather strange that accounts on Twitter that are linked to the Iranian regime calling for the annihilation of Israel are allowed to carry on unimpeded. Like, surely either we have Twitter has a rule that says, well, actually, political leaders probably shouldn't be inciting violence on our platform, which I personally would support, others may not. Either you have that rule or you don't. You don't just apply it to some people. And we had Twitter in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee with other social media platforms when I was a member of it. And there isn't a sensible answer for why that isn't the case at the moment. So I'm less exercised about it than some colleagues. It has been a controversial sticking point. I understand, and I know more than you will have heard publicly, that is going to be looked at again before the online harms bill comes back to the House. I suppose what I would particularly want, as somebody who's worked in more the security in the online scam space, preventing them, not carrying them out, for a long time, is that I don't want that holding up this really important work here, because people every day are being scammed out of tens of thousands of pounds, and we can't afford to have that carry on while we have an existential debate here. So there are some very concerning sort of types of content. We should be looking at whether it should be legal to do that and look at shifting more of those into the illegal rather than legal but harmful content, probably, if we're going to go that way. In terms of deregulation, look, deregulation should not be about making products or services unsafe. That's my view. I don't see who benefits from that.
Sure, thank you. And just carrying on that theme around the online harms bill, I'd be interested to know from Which's perspective, what it is that you would be looking to see maybe changes to what's been published already, but in how that legislation can be used to make consumers safer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page than Ruth. I mean, the part of the scams side, we need to get on with it. We are pretty happy with what is at the moment there. There may be some tweaks that we need to make, but actually the bill as it is, tackling a scam from pay for advertising and other scam is already, it's in very good shape and have been discussed in a lot of detail. So it's ready to go.
Just get it through the House.
No,
Just get it through. It's time to take some questions from the floor. So if we can just bear with me 1 minute. Just whilst we're getting the microphone, if at the start of your question, if you could just say your name and where you're from, and also please keep it to a short question. As much as we're very grateful for you all being here, we don't need long speeches. So please do just put your questions. So this lady right down the front here for me, please. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leslie Rudd. I'm Chief Executive of Electrical Safety First, which is a charity focused on electrical safety. So you've talked quite a lot about the online harms bill, and you haven't talked very much about physical products sold. So there's a lot of dangerous physical products being sold on the online marketplaces. Some of them are jumping on the bandwagon of scams. For example, energy-saving devices we tested recently, which didn't save energy and actually exploded when we got that footage on our website. So I guess my question is, we've got a bill which is we've been promoting, which is being taken forward, which is called the, let me say the name of it, the Sale of Goods Online Safety Bill. And that's to give protection to people buying online, the same as they get on the high street. And so I guess my question is, would people be prepared to support that? It's been taken forward. It's already had its first reading. And it's to give that same protection to consumers, which we think they deserve when they're buying products online from online marketplaces which aren't safe.
Sure, thank you. Racy, do you want to come in on this? I know you spoke about...
We have campaigned a lot on that, exactly the same issue, and we are with you, that we need more the online platforms or marketplaces having more responsibility about the safety of the products that they sell. We understand that BASE has said that they will consult on that, on strengthening that, and we will say that basically, you need to do this sooner rather than later. Now, we have been on that issue for years, and we constantly find products online that are unsafe, and we publish those investigations. I will say that every time that we find something online, we go to the relevant marketplaces to take it down. Some of them do, some of them take a little bit more lobby. So we need basically, the law to make them legally responsible for that.
Sure. And do you want to come in on this one, around what Amazon do for checking product safety or kind of flagging products that are online, as you say, that maybe aren't?
Yeah, I mean, we put a lot of effort on stopping that from happening in the first place. And last year, we took down 43 million products just before they were sold or shown. So we are really, really active in that prevention space. But when things do go wrong, we have very good interactions with trade and standards and with OPSS, and we act to take those products down and make sure that that doesn't happen. It does worry us when products that are unsafe end up on our site or in customers' hands. So it's a really important topic, definitely.
Okay. Next question.
Thank you. My name's Peter Crossan. I work for a national bank in financial crime. I also write a monthly article for a local paper on scams and educating people on the newest scams that are coming up. I'm very interested, Ruth, in what you've been saying today, and I think I'm about to push in an open door with what I'm about to say. I think a lot of what we've talked about is reacting to what scammers and criminals are doing. What I've been banging the drum for quite a while is education on preventing the scammers. A lot of people don't realise when I tell them that 52% of scams are committed on the age group of 16 to 34, not the silver surfer generation, which most people think. And the banks have done a lot of education on silver surfers, and they're in a really good place. But at the moment, if you're a young person and you start your first job and you are sent an email by the HMRC, you think that's legitimate. You don't know to expect a letter through the post. And what the missing piece is, I think, and what I've been banging the drum for, is financial literacy education in the 16 to 18-year-old year group at school. It will help to educate people on understanding what scams, because most people think, yeah, they're IT literate, young people are IT literate, but there's a big difference between being IT literate and financial literate. So what can we be doing, first of all, as a government, to ensure that financial literacy helps and is completed throughout the whole of the UK? What can the government be doing, and how can the banks get involved in that? Because it's a win-win for the banks as well, because it stops them losing money from scams.
Reece, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think it's a really good idea. I know that financial literacy, as part of like the PHSE curriculum, has improved in recent years. I don't know that it's particularly linked to the scam side of things. I think that's a really good idea, and it's something that I would like to explore with colleagues in DFE, because like I say, the education piece is so important. I think certainly getting in banks, getting in people who've had experience supporting victims of crime is really important, because I think fraud is often portrayed as sort of like a victimless crime. Oh, you've lost a bit of money, banks compensated you, it's fine, no one's really a victim. What it doesn't tell you about is the people who I have in my surgery who've had to fight back and forth with their bank for months to get compensation for an APP fraud, with no guarantee they'll get this 30, 40 grand back that was, their savings, part of their retirement savings. It doesn't show you sort of the fallout from people whose identities, for example, have been stolen, and then all sorts of things have happened as a result of that. It doesn't tell you about the emotional fallout from people who've basically been conned through romance scams, thought they were developing a relationship with someone, and then not only did they turn out to be a big disappointment, we'd all lived with that, but they tried to scam you out of that tens of thousands of pounds at the same time. So I think it's really important that in that education we do start to teach people about sort of the human cost and the fallout of it, because I think one of the reasons why people don't, we don't have fraud as such a high political priority is people do see it as a victimless crime, and it's not.
Thank you. Next question just down here. Sorry, Alice.
Hi, my name's Laura Weldon. I'm not here on behalf of any organisation, but I did used to work for the charity Independent Age. So I went out and did a lot of talking to older people, and we had a book called Scamwise that we used to give out to older people. Just sort of connected to what this gentleman here was saying, one of the things that I used to say to older people so quite often, because I'd be sitting there as a person they could trust, they would show me letters that they'd received, or they'd show me messages they got on their phones and things, and be like, is this a scam? And a lot of phone calls as well, because older people still have landlines, and landlines are catnip for scams. I would always say to people, tell them, if you don't want to be rude to them, tell them, if you're genuine, write to me. But what we tend to see at the moment is that the banks and the financial organisations are actually pushing more people towards like online apps, like text messages coming from your phone. And there's no way to stop that. So I would prefer, personally, if I got no emails from my bank, but I have no way to say, stop emailing me, because they demand to be able to email me about, I don't know, whatever they want. What can we do to demand that the consumers actually have more rights and more control over the information that they're getting, and the interaction that they have with genuine organisations like HMRC,
like banks, to be able to say, you can access me in these ways, so that if they are worried about getting scams in their emails or through their text messages, so you can't block non-geographic numbers on your phone, you can't block things that sending you text messages. How can the consumers actually have the responsibility that Ruth, you rightly said, that everybody needs to look both ways and across the road? They can't take that responsibility when the tech companies, the phone manufacturers, Google, whatever, are not giving you the ability to stop them before they get to you.
Rosie, do you want to take this one first? Or?
I think that just giving people the options is not going to really completely solve the problem, because you still can have criminals sending you a letter that is, that pretend to be another company. So I think that what we need is to think about the technology that you can use, and Ofcom is looking at it, about how you can prevent these scams getting into emails or in your text messages. And there is more that companies can do to introduce technology that will catch these scammers. And that is something that actually the regulator is looking at.
Ruth, anything you want to add on that in terms of what
yeah, I think I agree with Rossi. People can scam you through all different kinds of methods. I do think, though, we need to apply a lot more psychology to how we help to raise people's awareness about how they get scammed. Because you mention emails, and I get emails from my bank, and it says, this is an email from your bank. We want you to see what an example of a fraudulent email would look like. But most people, you're busy, you're flicking through your inbox. It's clearly an email that doesn't require any action. So what is the thing that goes in your mind as a result of that? My bank emails me. I might get an email from my bank. So I actually think there's quite a danger that that's going to have the reverse to the intended effect, because people get used to seeing communications from their bank like that. So I do think we need to get a lot smarter in terms of basic human psychology. How can we? And then then people get blamed for not. Customers get blamed for not checking out the scam that they've just sent money to, and then have to fight for their compensation. And I just don't think that's a very good system.
Next question was just down the front here.
Thank you. My name is Mark Googe. I'm a councillor from Evesham in Worcestershire, and I also run my own online publishing business. As Ruth says, you're more likely, particularly as a small business, to be a victim or target of online crime than you are to be a target of physical crime. And yet no MP, no councillor, PCC ever gets mailbags asking for more police officers sitting in darkened rooms staring at computer screens. They all want more bobbies on the beat. Do you think it's maybe time now to take responsibility for investigating online crime away from the territorial police forces and create a dedicated online policing force, analogous to the way that the British Transport Police is dedicated to transport crime, so that it doesn't have to compete with resources via the things that people are emailing and writing to their PCCs and MPs about?
Yeah, so we do that to an extent through the National Crime Agency and through the national sort of fraud squad that we have with the City of London Police, and I think that probably is the right approach. I think that the big issue, and they'll investigate, sort of most serious and endemic frauds. I think the issue, as I was saying in my opening remarks, with a lot of scams is just the difficulty of getting any kind of judicial outcome for it, because so often scammers aren't based in the UK. But yes, I do think we need to get a lot smarter how we organise our policing forces. We have this model for serious online frauds, and I think it's definitely worth considering expanding it to other types of online fraud that's currently investigated by territorial police forces. I definitely think it's worth looking at.
It's also about resourcing and cost, right? So obviously expanding police force or bringing a whole new police force when we're already trying to get the one that is on the streets increased is also a challenge. And I'm interested to bring Monica in here, just on, from Amazon's perspective, the resources that you must have to put into people checking these reviews, people checking these products, people policing the space that you operate. And that's just obviously one corner of the, quite a large corner of it, but one part of it. So what does that resourcing look like for you? What does that team look like? Just to give us a sense of, if you were trying to police parts of the internet in this way, coming from one perspective of it, how does it look?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the picture. I mentioned we have 12,000 people globally kind of combating abuse online. We put a lot of resources. We have a lot of sophisticated machine that we're constantly improving. And that's really important. We stopped 200 million fake reviews before they were ever posted. So there's a lot that you can do to stop things in the first place. But we're just part of the picture, and there is a lot to do working with those enforcement authorities, with the NCSC that we work very closely with, and the National Crime Agency and the National Economic Crime Unit as well. But I mean, we're just one part of the very, very big ecosystem here, really. And I'm not sure that you can sort of split the online, offline that easily. As everyone has said, these are very, very sophisticated criminals that operate in both worlds. We just need to do the same, and that's what we're doing. So it's not just the AI and the ML, of course. It's a lot of people constantly, and big teams that are focusing on safety and compliance. And I know lots of other companies are taking this really, really seriously. We see it on a number of groups where we see that there is a very concerted cross-industry effort in this space. And everyone is really kind of on it.
And the next question was just down the gentleman down the front there. Thanks very much.
I'm Matt Vickers from the Ombudsman Services, so we're the Energy and Telecoms Ombudsman. I think it's something that we just touched on in the last couple of questions, sort of it. This question about safety tech. So when you look, there's this opportunity that people talk about, this multi-billion-pound industry around safety tech. But it does kind of raise the question about how much of that should be a private market. How much of that do you think we should have, say, companies like Monica's saying, like Amazon, might be investing lots of money in it, the skills, the resources, the things that are needed to do that. Is that something that should be left up to a new industry, safety tech, or how do we think, how much of that might we want to run as a public good?
Who wants to take this one first? Yeah, if you...
So, I mean, we've had cybersecurity as a fantastic business opportunity, as well as an issue for all companies to tackle. We have a thriving cybersecurity sector here in the UK. We have done for many years. The UK was one of the first countries with its original 2011 National Cybersecurity Strategy to really invest in growing that industry as well and in growing exports from it. In terms of private companies investing in it, yeah, I think it's quite right they do. We don't expect the government to pay for people's burglar alarms and locks on factory doors, do you? I think where the government, needs to step in and does, and the National Cybersecurity Centre does, they have a team that works very closely with industry. They do, step in when industry is targets of very large, well-organised, either criminal or nation-state sponsored attacks. And we do see a very close partnership between government and the private sector, and have done for many, many years with different, in sort of different guises, both with information sharing and fighting back against attacks. And we do see a lot of good partnership working there.
Thanks very much. Yeah, next question. Stop.
Hi there, Chris Walker from the Advertising Association, and I used to lead the APP scams work at Which, so it's good to hear that that's still being talked about. Our concern is that advertising at the moment is being split between the Online Safety Bill and the Online Advertising Programme, and the definitions of advertising, scam advertising, which we all want to tackle because it undermines the work that our members do, is very wide at the moment, and it risks that if it were to be implemented as it is currently, that legitimate advertising would also be affected because platforms would be put in a position whereby they have to kind of overreach in the ads that they prevent being posted. So I was just wondering, how does the panel think that we can ensure that the regulation is written in such a way and enacted in such a way to ensure that legitimate advertising doesn't get affected by the definitions that are currently in place?
Ruth, do you want to take this one first?
In what way do you think that it would undermine legitimate advertising? Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so some of the platforms, for example, are concerned that the way that the legislation is written at the moment and the way the definitions of advertising is written, or scam advertising is written, is so broad that legitimate adverts could fall under scope. So there would be certain product categories, for example, where it would be very difficult to tell whether it's a legitimate advert or a fraudulent advert, and the definitions are currently so wide around scam advertising that legitimate advertising from actual companies would potentially fall under scope of that as well.
I would want to understand more of the detail as to why that was the case, because I'm pretty skeptical, to be honest. Like, if you're a legitimate company, maybe your ad gets held back for a bit longer while it's investigated, but I don't see why it couldn't go up at all. So I'd want to know what specifically they thought was an issue there, because obviously we expect industries that we regulate to not want that regulation or want as minimal as possible, but I'm afraid fraudulent adverts are costing my constituents tens of thousands of pounds, so my sympathy is a bit limited.
Okay.
Yeah, next one.
Hi, Gurinder Johns from Lloyds Banking Group. So really pleased to hear that you bank with us, Ruth. I agree with so much that the panel have said, especially on how tackling scams should be a shared responsibility, that there should be more focus on prevention, and that should be a higher political priority. On that last point about increasing it as a political priority, I was just curious to hear the panel's view of what that would actually look like. Is that a minister for fraud? Is that kind of some kind of scams lead accountable to Home Office or Treasury? Just wanted to hear a bit more about what you think that could look like and how we can actually boost that up the political agenda.
So I think it's a good question for hopefully to bring all of you in. And Rosie, I don't know if you have thoughts from Which's perspective on how you want to see maybe this model working, or kind of, is it a person, is it a body, or do we just have too many of these things and we need to simplify the whole thing and just get the message out there?
I mean, instead of talking whether it's a body or not, or, it's about how we can make sure that there is more coordination and more sharing of expertise and more sharing of data and ideas on how to tackle these things. And in that respect, I think that there is more to be done in that. Whether that will be a body, a minister in charge, I don't know, but I completely agree that there needs to be a coherent plan to deal with this, with the scams, and because they are being enabled by different routes. So having a coherent strategy is something that will be needed. Yeah.
So when I was a junior consultant at Deloitte, I was given the very unlucky task of making a PowerPoint slide diagram of all the different government departments and teams that were involved in delivering the National Cybersecurity Strategy. It was a very late night and a very complex diagram, I'll put it that way. We've had different iterations of how government is organised, how it's organised across government, how it works with policing, with the private sector. I genuinely think that the problem in terms of political priority is less the organisation, because we have now, things like the National Cybersecurity Centre, it's the public-facing arm of GCHQ. That's how government engages with industry on cybersecurity issues. I think it's less about organisation and more about this perception that fraud is a victimless crime. And that's why there is far more political priority given to other forms of crime, particularly those where people are perhaps physically hurt. And I think that is the issue more than how it's organised.
And Monica, what support is it that companies like Amazon need from the government, or what new support or what additional work could be done to help what you're doing?
Well, we are very much focusing on kind of maintaining trust on our side, as I said. At the moment, I suppose what I'd observe is there are a number of legislation proposals out there. The Product Security Bill, for instance, is one you mentioned, which we absolutely support. As a manufacturer, we think those three standards are right. We've been working on it 2.5 years. We've heard of it. It's really important. There's the Online Safety Bill. There's the Online Advertising Program. There's a lot of regulation coming through and coming out. And I think for us, to make sure that kind of it is consistent and that it is comprehensive, proportionate, targeted, that it's focused on outcomes, that there is transparency, that there is reporting. But, if we were to kind of draw a slide, and when we have to draw a slide of what's the government regulation coming our way, I do have those late nights on my side.
Feel your pain, Monica.
I'd say there is a lot out there, and it is good stuff. But some of the details still needs to be kind of sorted, and I think everyone's working on that, and that's why we're having this conversation here today.
We've got time for one more question, so if we can go just over there.
Oh, thanks, Angus. Jane Wallace from Trustpilot. First of all, I just want to echo Monica's point around reviews. You know, we see reviews as being hugely valuable both to consumers and to businesses. But what kind of really struck me from the discussion was that the issue, and that issue around building trust online, it is not just a UK issue, it's a global issue. So I was wondering if you could get the panel's take on what could be done internationally kind of in this space. Is there more collaboration, sharing of best practice? But also, can the UK take a leading role in that, kind of mindful that when it was taking leadership of the G7, digital was one of the big issues on the agenda. So is there perhaps a follow-through piece that the UK government could lead in this space?
Thanks very much. Monica, if I go to you first on that question around, obviously, Amazon, you have the sort of Amazon UK part of the global company that is Amazon. So presumably you work within that space to share best practice across your territories, or is it a fairly siloed operation?
No, we do, and I think it's a really important point, and it is a global space, and Ruth has mentioned that already before about, you can't solve the UK problems just by thinking about the UK in isolation in some cases. So we're very active in a lot of global forums. There are a lot of conversations ongoing about that. The action we've taken on fake reviews, we've taken in a number of other countries, Japan, the US, Germany, France, Italy, because it is a global challenge. The UK has a lot to sort of show for itself. It has great regulatory environments, it's very evidence-based, it's proportionate, the principles are very, very good. If anything, we're a champion of the UK internationally to say, look, there's a lot of good that can be learned, but there's also a lot that we can learn from others, and we're in the business of learning wherever the good ideas come from. Thank you.
Mauricio, obviously Which is domestic, but how much are you working with kind of partners internationally to, as Jane said,
UK is based here, but we are members of Consumer International, representing consumers internationally, and another organization that's called BEOC that represent consumers in Europe. So I completely endorse what Monica said there about that actually this country have a lot of thought leadership in many of these areas. Unfortunately, in some areas, actually, the implementation of this is going faster now than in here. For example, on the digital competition agenda, there is already an act in Europe, and here we still don't even have a draft bill. But in terms of how to resolve these problems in a proportional manner, we are leading in our thinking in this area. Completely agree that there needs to be exchanging views and evidence internationally, and the regulators do. The regulators and the government engage internationally in these issues, so definitely.
So I think it's a great question. The UK has a really good reputation globally for cybersecurity. The government has worked with other countries overseas to help build cyber defence and resilience and that sort of national strategy piece for many, many years. And if you look at something like the consumer product standards that I was mentioning earlier, we are one of the first countries in the world to do that. It comes off the back of voluntary industry code of practice that was developed in 2016. We're now putting that into law because we haven't seen enough movement of the market towards that. But that code of practice is also being used by a lot of other countries as a way of developing their own legislation in this area. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities to build on that.
Thank you very much. That is unfortunately all that we have time for this afternoon. My thanks to Rocio, to Ruth, to Monica, to Which for sponsoring, to all of you for joining us here and online. The Conservative Home Fringe at Party Conference does trundle on for the next day and a half, both here in the Marquee and over in Hall 6. Up next in here, we've got In Conversation with Ben Houchin, Mayor of the Tees Valley. So do stick around, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.